Okay, speed round of the recap tutorial. We went through this in class, but just in case you need a refresher, the assignment, as a reminder, is to use a word with 5 to 8 letters in it, and to use this kind of standard motion graphics approach that we looked at in class. So I'm not going to do everything in detail like I did in class, but I did create a text object, not the text spline, which is a fine object, right? But we want to use the text one, which will automatically give us some 3D letters. And we can go into its object parameters and change like what the depth of the letters. We can change whether it's positioned at the middle, the left, or the right, right? I can change the font. We can change the adaptive qualities, which is where the points are placed as it constructs the object based on its level of detail. So if I get to the point that I turn this up really high, I can get kind of clunky looking letters, which has its own charm to it. I'm not going to talk too much about that. We'll talk about this in part 2 of the tutorial. So I'll leave that kind of at a standard. The caps, I've just set this to have a little small bevel on it. And let's make it 4 little divisions. Okay, so I have some 3D letters, and I want to animate these. And what I'm going to use is something called an effector. And with that effector, I'm going to use something called a field. Now, the example I gave in class is that of Photoshop workflow. Well, let's say I have a landscape image, and that's the image that's in the layer panel. And then on top of that, I might put a level or curves adjustment. And so I make those changes, but let's say I only want those changes with we'll say levels, changed in specific places on my image in Photoshop. And I control that by using a mask to say, hey, let's darken the sky, but let's not darken the landscape, right? And then I create like a black and white image that tells Photoshop where to apply the level adjustment and where to not apply it. Or in the gray tone, some percentage of that in between. So we're going to do the same thing where I have the text object, and then I'm going to apply an effector, which will be that levels adjustment, and then we're going to use the field to only apply the effect in certain places, and then we'll animate that mask, that field across the object. And this gives us a lot of flexibility to experiment and try things. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll click on the text object. And when I have this active, if I create an effector, it will make the connection between the two of them. If I don't have anything selected and I create this effector that I'm going to do here in a second, it won't connect, though I'll show you in a second, I can make that happen. So best thing to do is just select my text object, which in essence is like a cloner. It's making clones of letters. It's just putting different ones in there, right? The B, the U, the B, the B, the L, the E. Sounds like a little rap. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and create an effector, and I'll create the plane effector. And you can see that something happened, right? My text moved because the plane effector, underneath its parameters, says it already as a default has a position active. So this is going to affect these letters, and it's going to move it up 100 centimeters in the Y. Well, I'm just going to make this minus 200 for no other reason than that's what I want to do. I'll just try that. So at this point, 100% of the effect is being applied to the objects, and I know that because if I look at the strength slider, I can move this back and forth, right? So this would be no effect. This would be 100%. And if we go back to the parameters, you can imagine there's lots of different things that I could do, right? I could, and in fact, we'll come back and tweak these later. But for now, we'll just leave that, and let's just deal with the position. Okay, so I have the text. The text is being affected with this plane effector, which is kind of like, just affect everything. And then the field is like the mask. We can create fields inside of here. We could create fields out here and then drag them into this so that this object knows what kind of mask to use, right? So I'm going to just show a couple of these, then we'll come back and do one with the linear. But let's do spherical. And we have these little widgets where I can control the the amount. So towards the center of this mask, this would be 100% of the effect. And this is like a little widget for controlling the fall off, right? And how this is applied. So it's going to be 100% all the way in here, and then it's going to fall off as it moves through space, right? So this is like a three-dimensional mask, right? So this is kind of interesting. Creates a nice little, easy little animation. Let's zoom back out here. So this would be the spherical. Let's go ahead and just turn that off, and let's go ahead and create the linear field. And I'm going to create it here, right? And fields get used in lots of different ways. They're pretty amazing. But if I create this field and I don't see anything happen, if I click on the plane and I go to the field, then I can just take that and drag it and drop in here. So now they're connected to each other. So the text underneath the letters shows that it's being affected by the plane. And if I click on the plane and I go underneath the fields, I can see the field that's connected to it. And if I click on the field, again, it has these little handles on here. So this would be 100%, and this would be 0% of that effect, right? So it's just like a linear mask that you might have in Photoshop, okay? And this is what we did in class, and we just animated that. I actually kind of like the idea of animating this with the sphere, so I'm going to just go ahead and do that. The default is to assign kind of a random color so that you can see what is being affected or not. And there's ways to use that as part of the rendering, like you can feed that color into the render. We'll cover that right now. I'm doing 7 minutes, we're doing good. Okay, so I just have this sphere plane effector that's in here. I'm going to animate that. Before I animate it though, with nothing selected, I'm going to hit Command D on the Mac, or with nothing selected. If we just hit the little up arrow, we can just go to the project settings, and I'm going to make the frames per second 24. So with nothing selected, you can also get it over here, just at project settings, and we're just going to, for all of our projects, render it or animate at 24 frames per second. And I'll make the animation just a little bit longer, 150 frames. Let's select the field, and I'll move it over here so nothing's being affected. I will go to the coordinates, and I'm just clicking on the P. So for the position here, that selects all three of those parameters. And if I just hit a little keyframe, it keyframes all those position attributes, and I don't know, let's go for 48 frames in. And now that I'm at that place, I will keyframe again, and let's see what I get. Okay. So, wow, very exciting, right? But the nice thing is that we can continue to build on this in lots of different ways. So let's try another effector. So this time I have the text selected, and I'm going to go up to effector and choose random. And the random, as a default, if I go to its parameters, randomly moves the position. I actually don't want to use that. I'm going to use the rotation, and this is what I did at class. So I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees. And the random, you can see as I'm doing this, it's still just saying the same the whole entire time, right? So that's not really what I want in this case. So for the random, I want it to also be affected by this spherical field. So, and I'm just kind of making this up as I go along, right? We can try lots of different things. So for random, if I want this spherical field that I'm using for the plane effector to also affect that, I will just drag it in here. And you can see that, right, so I get this kind of weird little bouncy thing. I'm not even sure like why I want to do some of this. It's very quick in the animation, but we'll go with that for now. So you can see you can layer these things up. The last thing, I think I did this in class, is the delay effector. So the delay can add some springiness to your text in this kind of animation. So you can see I have plane and random. So the last one is I will come here and just say delay. And delay, you don't like set position or anything. You just say, I want you to affect the position, rotation, scale. And of course you can turn some of these off. Maybe you don't want it to bounce one way or the other. But in this case, I want the effector. I'm not gonna explain all these, but the one we want almost all the time is spring. And I'll just turn that up as a percentage. And now that I do that, I'm going to modify, I'm going to make the animation just a little bit slower. All right. Right, so all that secondary motion is happening with the delay, right, as it's modifying it. You know, the other thing too, one thing I don't like here is that you can see that it's going down and it stays pushed down for quite a while. And part of that is just the shape, the size of this fall off. So let's see if I can. That's getting there. I'm going to just make that a little bit smaller so I can smooth out that masking of it. Because I didn't want it to just be pushed down the whole entire time. I wanted to get pushed down and then push itself back up. So as we saw in class, there's so many different ways to do this. And a lot of students were making different animations, different rotations or whatever, kind of based on what the word itself was. Mine has it's bubble, right? I tried to do something like that, pushing it down and letting it kind of bounce back up. But this is, again, because it's non-destructive, I can come back and change the way some of these parameters work. Maybe for the bubble, maybe I'll make it when it gets affected to change as far as scale. I'm going to randomize that a little bit, or I don't know, maybe I'll leave that where it is. I could try something with position. I mean, there's so many different things. The delay, let me just recap that again. Spring is the mode that you want. I haven't even really used these that much, honestly. Spring does most of the things that I want in here. And you can see the spring is happening throughout the animation. In this case, I don't really want a field. This is kind of like the final touch that I'm putting on top of all these letters. All right. Easy, simple, part one. All right. Happy animating.